Welcome to the Therapist Burnout Podcast, episode 69. Hey, therapists. Today I have David Politi, the host of the Empowered Through Compassion podcast, with us today, talking to us about intersections with burnout and IFS and his own story. So, David, as we do when I have guests on, what is your burnout story?
Oh, hi, Jen. It's so nice to see you again. And thank you for having me. So my burnout story, well, I'm going to start out being difficult here right off the bat. And it's a pleasure being here, and we're going to have fun. Um, I think burnout is a constant state where we always have it. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. And I'd love to riff off of you and then tell you my burnout story, because I did come here with the burnout story.
Are you avoiding your burnout story?
Yeah, I might be avoiding my burnouts. Yes, I might be. But indulge me for a second. No, I think it's a spectrum. I don't think it's like this dirty word or this terrible thing. I was thinking about it after we spoke the first time, and and I think that it's like, we all have points of the day even where it's a little bit more knocking on our door or a little bit less knocking on our door. If we look at different careers, if we've had multiple ones like myself throughout our career, there's times in the career where it gets a little bit louder, a little bit softer. But I don't think it's like you either have it or you don't. I think that if we look at our lives, it's like, I don't know. I read in the news somewhere that we're all, or most of us, if we're not Elon Musk, we're like 3 months away from being homeless, like three, bad months of work and paychecks away from being homeless. I think the same is true with burnout. We're all, in this hyper stressed out world that we live in. We're kind of at that borderline where, we try to protect ourselves. We try to have these great self-care skills. I'm a therapist, right? So we're always talking about self-care. But, I don't think it's that far away from any of us. And I think in pieces of our life, we all have it to some degree. So I'm going to tell you about my burnout story. Um, Before I was a therapist, I went to school and I was dying to be a school counselor, which is similar, but, in schools. And I was there 6 years. I was in the school system. And then I went back to get another master's degree because I was crazy and wanted to be in debt for the rest of my life. But when I was in the school system, I was really loving it and really enjoying it. I loved the kids. It was all different ages, but I love the elementary school kids because you're like their hero. You don't have to do anything. You just give them attention and you just love them and you're their hero. High school kids, not so much. Um, and when I was in the school system, I got pretty burnt out. And I remember being in places where I would say, if we're on the scale from 0 to 10, how strong is your burnout? I was probably hovering around a 9.5 at times. I remember particularly as we're talking, one job is coming up where I was like almost like walking around in a little bit of a haze at times. And it was a high school, an agricultural high school. And it was not because of the marijuana smoke that the kids were probably smoking in the bathrooms. It was more just, probably to be honest, I was burned out. And ironically, that was my first job. You would think it would be by the sixth, school system. Actually, that's not accurate. I was in 3 or 4 different school systems. So, but you'd think it'd be by the 6th year, but this was my first year, in the job. And, I would say that I was pretty burned out. And it was probably because of me. It was probably because of overthinking and all of my deep, deep emotions that were coming up. And as I was thinking about this story, um, there's definitely parts that were coming up inside of me that were contributing to this feeling of being burned out.
Yeah. So maybe say more about that. Say more about, maybe we can just start by giving a little bit of like parts work? And if therapists don't know, because I think we should just talk a little bit about parts and maybe what parts were coming up for you, but just in general as a theme of therapist parts, which might be a theme of this episode, to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, okay. Well, parts work goes way, way back, and there's probably other cultures throughout history that have seen us in this way. Um, I love to do EMDR and IFS and combine the two. So my verbiage might be IFS heavy, but but definitely other EMDR, and that stands for, and please jump in, ask me anything that, feels interesting or that I should expand on. But EMDR stands for eye movement, desensitization and reprocessing. And so within that universe, there's this thing called ego states, which in some ways is very similar to IFS. Um, so that kind of falls under the whole parts. But even if you think back to Freud, he talked about parts. He talked about the id, ego, and superego. So those are basically parts too. Um, I'll default to this guy that's great. His name is Robert Falconer. He has this book called The Others Within Us. And he talks about this probably originally, again, from history, years and years. But he talks about the multiplicity of the mind, and that within the mind, we are multiple. So, I think we could dive into this. Within the field of therapy, um, we like to label things,
I love
or
it.
at least the field does. I know a lot of us kind of balk at that, and so we label that DID. Oh my God, you have multiple personalities. And again, the reality is, I think it's more of like a spectrum kind of feel where we all have multiple personalities. And when we get way, way, way on the side where we are experiencing DID or dissociative identity disorder, it's more that there's this huge amnesia barrier. So we'll go into a part and we'll lose track of time and we'll completely forget everything else about us. And then we'll go to another, what they call alter, and then forget everything. So the alters won't even know each other at times. And it'll be really like, I'm one person. At some point in time, something will happen. I'm totally switched my personality. I'm not talking about that when I talk about parts. I'm talking about if we all go down inside of ourselves, we could start hearing like we have these different voices. And maybe it's not specifically a voice. Maybe it's more a felt sense within our body somewhere. Or maybe it's more we could dive into pictures that are available to us, internal pictures. And Jung talks about archetypes. So maybe these are archetypes or, the masks that we wear every day in everyday life. But we have these parts of us, and sometimes they don't get along. Sometimes they disagree with each other. Sometimes one part wants one thing and it pulls us here, and then another part wants something else and it pulls us there. So when we talk about parts, it's really about getting a deeper understanding and appreciation of our own uniqueness and the uniqueness of these beings that kind of live within us. That's my definition of parts.
Thank you
My,
for
my
that.
one of mine.
Yeah, no, I would just love to hear people how they can conceptualize, their work and themselves. So maybe talk a little bit, just personalize it for you. So you were in the situation in schools, it was 1 year, and that certainly resonates with one of my first jobs. When I was a therapeutic caseworker, you'd think I was 20 something, bright eyed and bushy tailed. And it was 1 year of doing that work in therapeutic foster care casework where I kind of told myself I can't work with kids anymore. And I haven't for nearly 20 years, which I started doing that recently. But I'm just wondering what was coming up for you then? What parts or what
Yeah.
things or themes?
So it was my first job. I was there for 2 years. Um, I was feeling this urgency, which I guess now we could look at a part or, an element within that wasn't my true core self, but this urgency of I need a job. I'm um out of my master's degree program, and I had some jobs prior to the master's degree program, which were not too fulfilling and didn't feel really like this is what I want to be doing. But this after going for my degree, this was something I wanted to be doing. And I was trained with elementary school kids. So I didn't know that much about high school kids at the time, other than, I had this really wonderful person who was my supervisor for my internship. And she said, people are people. They're a little bit bigger in body, but they're people. People are people, and they're just bigger kids. And of course, developmentally, there's definite shifts that go on. Um, but it was the only job I could get at that point because it's hard to get a school job right out of school. And it was a lot of money at the time. It was like $31,000. And I was like, oh my God, I'm rich. And this was like 2000.
So you're a
And
school counselor, like a guidance counselor.
yes, but here, I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to say something naughty. Um, God, I talk in circles. So please focus me because I'm going to start this story and I promise I'll get back to my point. But I'm gonna talk a little bit about something larger and then come back to it. Um, when you came on my podcast, we spoke about, burnout, and we spoke about how burnout is a body reaction, which is really like some wisdom, right? It's a part telling us some wisdom, and there's usually a bigger, broader kind of cultural element or element within our lives or within our jobs or within our fields that we're responding to in some way. So I would say that with this job, I was a little bit naive and I went in not really knowing a lot about school politics. I think I was really sheltered from that when I was the intern. And it was really about just helping the children. But I got a big crash course in school politics in this job. And so it was a guidance counselor, and they did want me to talk about colleges with the kids, which I didn't really have any desire to do. But again, it's $30,000. This is amazing. Nice school campus too. Um, but what really happened was there was politics where they were trying to get the guy out of the role that was there before me. And so there was concerns about him. And instead of doing it another way, they said, well, if we change the job title, we could get him out and put him back in a teacher role. And so they hired me as a school adjustment counselor. And so that was my title, because I had done my internship with a school adjustment counselor. And I was interested in like, oh, school social worker, that sounds amazing. So they hired me under the guise of you're a school adjustment counselor or yeah, it was actually that was the title. But it was really, I think, primarily to do the college counseling. And so it already set me up in this weird dynamic with the other teachers. And this teacher was still in the school. And it also kind of showed me how, as a school counselor, my experience, so I won't say everybody's, but my experience was it's not really about counseling. That's a sliver of what you're doing. You're really the politician in the school that has to make everybody happy. And a lot of times I found schools don't appear to care a lot about kids' mental health. Well, if they're mentally healthy, great. But generally they're caring a lot more about money, a lot more about funding, a lot more about keeping the school afloat because they're sinking, and about test scores and about keeping parents happy. And then, if the kids are happy, that's kind of uh, first it's the principals, then it's like maybe the teachers, parents are kind of on the same line, and then way down low is the students. And I wanted to be careful kind of coming on this podcast with you as I was thinking about it and talking about it, because I think what happened was, back then and even now, I think I have a part that's a real kind of social justice part that comes up and then starts speaking. And that part, would be happy to spend hours telling you about all of its feelings about my situation, but then also the situation of a lot of public school systems, and what they're going through today. And some of the just very disturbing things that happen, especially the kids that are mentally ill, struggling, have learning disabilities that don't quite fit into the system. This part has done a lot of reading about, how schools have kind of established themselves. And so I don't want that part to just take over. But as we're talking about parts, I want to name that there's this social justice part that um, has a lot of anger about what I witnessed those 6 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I almost think of it like when I think of myself in that casework role when I was 25, 20, how old was I? 20, I was 24, just, yeah, almost 20 years ago. And, in a way, I know this podcast can reach other younger clinicians or people in these younger roles who really have a desire to help children or to help the people that they're working with. And so it's like I feel this duty in some way. So that part comes strong in me too, where I'm just like, I have this duty where I feel I don't want people to go through that. I don't want that for the upcoming clinicians. I don't want that for the kids that are in these systems. And I work in a system in a school now as a contract worker. So
Now you're a little bit protected because you're a contract worker, but I'm sure you still see a lot of this. I'd
I
imagine.
see a lot of, yeah, the fallout from the system. Right? Like the system, a lot of people feel like that cog in the machine in a lot of ways
I
and
was
feel
told I had a fellow, um, what's his name? But there was a fellow counselor that I worked with in one of the systems, and he was a nice guy, and in some ways he treated me like he was like a mentor to me. And he said, David, you just got to get it in your head. We are a cog in the system. We are just a cog.
yeah.
And I smiled and nodded, and in my head, I'm like, I'm not a cog. I don't want to be a cog. But maybe there's some truth to that.
Yeah. And and I think the anger, so whatever however you conceptualize the angry part or that part of you that feels that sense of injustice for being within these systems, for the part of yourself that wanted to help, and that's what I struggle with, and that's what I hear from other therapists, is like that beautiful part of them that wanted to help had to go away. They had to really hide because it couldn't be available
See,
anymore.
mine was different, and I appreciate what you're saying, and I
Yeah.
definitely could see that. Mine wanted to run. Mine wanted
Yeah,
to run
similar.
and find another, which is similar. It wanted to find another way to do it. It was like, I'm not giving up yet. And so I went back to it for a master's in social work at that point. And that felt really good because now all of a sudden I had classes that were not only about individual therapy, but it was also about the macro environment and learning a little bit more. I'm not an expert, but learning a little bit more about policy and politics and, the government. But when you talk about that hopeless part, what comes up for me is I feel that too, and I have other parts that want to fight it and or deny it. Because I don't want to be hopeless. If I'm sitting with my client, I want to lean into hope and not hopelessness. But whether it's the school political terrible, environment and air within the school system, or if it's social work and counseling and the insurance companies and some of the politics around that, or even just, I think on a more and more macro scale, and not to be a total downer here, but my hopeless part is just going nuts, is the political environment that we find ourselves in. And
Yeah,
I saw somewhere that Trump was slashing words, right? Like, what a fucking asshole. Sorry, you could edit that out if you want. But
that's
he's
okay.
he probably AI is listening to me and I'm gonna be jailed later today. Um, that Trump is slashing words like women, like you shouldn't say woman, and mental health. Shouldn't say mental health. That's right up there, I guess, with DEI and
Yeah.
diversity. And so it's very scary times, and I think it's so important to hold on to hope, but it may be a very connected thing. to this burnout is, this other part of hopelessness. They kind of seem to me to go together.
Definitely. I'm just breathing that in for a second. And I'm kind of connecting what you said before about like, that part felt like it had to hide. And I guess you're right. Like when I moved away from foster care, I went into my doctoral program.
Mm,
Right. So similar process. I was like, oh, I can't do this kind of social work or social justice work. And that's what I conceptualize what school counselors do as well. I think it's in the realm of social work
you
within
know,
systems.
I found, and again, this is my angry part. I found this more politician.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. I could totally see that. But maybe like what it should be is somewhat of
Yeah,
social work. What
I'll
it
get
should
behind
be.
that. Yes.
And also I felt that way in doing foster care casework. I should be, in that role where I'm helping, kids
But
stay
you have to go
connected to
against the system, right? You have to go
right,
against the country and the history of the country, which is some of the history of the country is that poverty is a personal failing, right? It's that
right.
motto that if you're poor, it's because you didn't pick yourself up enough and you were lazy or whatever. And so being in that role, which I was too as an in-home therapist, you're also dealing with people who have been beat down by a system that has caused a lot of shame and sometimes internal shame within those people.
Yeah. Yeah, so kind of going back to that theme of like running or escaping the work and trying to like no, like there's that part in me that wants to access this hope, that wants to see this change in the world, that believes that it's possible and believes that I can help to facilitate that change. That part wants to still do the work, right? So that part runs to like for me, complete the doctoral program. For you, get your LCSW. You have a LCSW, yes.
LICSW in
So
Massachusetts.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
similar.
same thing. Same thing.
Yeah, similar, just different little letters. Yeah, big letters. Sorry, those are big letters. Let me put big letters. Uh,
Capital. Yeah.
capital, capital, capital. Yes. So I think it has us do there, and I see that in therapists as well who talk to me like maybe I should get a certification in EMDR or IFS, or because I can't do this regular therapy thing, or I can't do this other thing. So we want to run to figure out how we can do the work. When I think if we're looking at that macro level, right, at the system, it's I think a reaction that we're having to the places that we're in.
Yes and no. Yes and no. I guess I agree with you, and there's a part of me that's like, oh, maybe there's a nuance, and maybe it's a difference in our perception, or um, I think it depends really what these students or young people in our field or new, workers, what they're really wanting out of their careers. If they're really wanting to do social justice work and helping out with society, 100% I agree with you. I think you're absolutely correct. If they're really wanting to do, I got another mad part here or annoyed part. Um, if and I will say too that like in IFS, what they say is speak for your parts, not from your parts. So I'm trying to like acknowledge my parts and hear them, but I'm not like blah 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 blah. Maybe a little bit, but I'm not. I don't think. Hopefully, I'm not blended with them as much as just giving them a little bit of a platform and translating for them. So just that's a little bit about IFS. But so I guess yeah. What I disagree with is that if somebody really, really is passionate about doing individual therapy and trauma therapy with their clients, then I don't think the master degree programs, at least the ones that I'm aware of, really do that justice. I think there's
Mm,
so limited conversation about even trauma and relationship and so much else that they would say they need to teach students. Maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong. But there's some core elements that I really feel they're lacking that I feel if somebody was to learn EMDR or IFS or even IFS informed EMDR, it could really help them be a therapist in a way that just, to my system, feels so much deeper and so much more effective and authentic. And there's a real kind of intimate relationship that you're able to have when you're looking at a client and what they're bringing with a certain kind of map or a certain kind of vantage point. So I definitely feel that, for some, and this might not be an answer for burnout, but for some who are not feeling like, oh, I wish I could be more effective, or this just isn't feeling right. To me, I feel that IFS-Informed EMDR has really helped me understand things and see an inner landscape that I was just blind to before then.
Yeah. Yeah. So relating that perhaps to like if a clinician, let's say they're burned out, they're a therapist and they want to integrate this modality or do this modality, are you kind of saying that's a way to do the work in a way that's more sustainable? What would you say?
Yeah. Well, I guess this is where I kind of definitely join with you and your wisdom and knowledge that I think the first step is to really kind of get a better understanding of what's burning you out. Like what are the parts inside of you that are bringing you to this space? And you said on my podcast, like kind of what you do, and then maybe what we all do if we're working with somebody who is feeling burned out, is to really understand what are the factors that are going on inside of you as well, and where do they really desire to go to, um, where do their values kind of where are their values leading them, and if they were to be able to feel free of self-judgment, feel free of the shame to kind of really explore, you have all of these options. You could stay, you could leave. What do you want? And what do you feel you need? And
Mhm.
then at that point, if they want to stay, and specifically if they want to stay and work with individuals doing trauma, and that feels like a real passion and a real guide for them, then I would say, yeah, I would say that um, again, it's personal, so, it's just my journey, but I would say that, um, EMDR, IFS have really helped me, um, feel more inspired, feel more hopeful, feel more like, "Wow, there could be real change in this deep level," which I never knew was possible. I mean, for me, and these were all things that I felt, in the past, but I didn't have the words, and I wasn't quite able to do it on my own. I feel that, IFS has been a window for me to start talking about spirituality with
Mhm.
clients. And that was just amazing. That was just this godsend, like, yay. And not everybody wants to talk about spirituality. And we all talk about it in very different ways. So it doesn't have to be God, it doesn't have to be Jesus, but just this higher power that is within us that we could access. And really, that all of us, because I hate when people go to me and they're like, you're the professional. I'm paying you the money. You have the answers. And it's like, well, I am a professional and you are paying me money, but I hate to tell you this, I don't have the answers. I really don't. When my job is to sit here with you with compassion, with acceptance, and to be with you on the journey and to help you listen to the answers that are already inside of you. And so and those answers that are already inside of you, that's your higher self that knows, and if you can't hear that, then let's figure out how we could listen to that. And let's figure out what's getting in the way of that.
Yeah.
But that kind of kernel, that's to me, that's spirituality. That kernel is not only this higher force within them, but it connects to the higher force within all of us. And so that kind of language, I think, was much more available to me with IFS and talking about what they call self energy. Then you're talking about now you're bringing in a spiritual level when you're talking about this energy, this self energy.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think I hear it from a lot of therapists who are what I call more end stage burnout, where I feel like, and these are the words they'll say, I don't have anything left to give. I I am really at capacity for giving. So if you look up human giver syndrome, all of that, they have come to the end of their selves. Most of the people I work with and listen to my podcast are female identifying. And I think we are just in a place in society where we're constantly on, we're constantly giving, constantly working. And so I hear that voice of them also saying like some people say, yes, I do want to be in this work. I do want to continue to do this work. And I feel like EMDR, I did some parts training. I'm not IFS trained, but I was certified in I still am certified in EMDR. And it was such a transformational training for me to go through and to be an EMDR client as well, to really see that transformation that can happen for me to a part of my burnout was I had panic attacks driving. And so to be able to work through that with my EMDR therapist and find that I no longer have them. And didn't see that in my training where I was taught pretty much CBT manualized treatments was what the way I came up in learning in the early 2000s of how to do therapy. I of course did some Yalom. Part of my training was also process
I did it
Yalom
too.
kind of
Yep, yep.
wonderful training in college counseling centers, which I always said I wanted to get back to, and I never found that. I really wanted to do some kind of group healing work, and I tried to do those things in my private practice, tried to launch them, but it never happened.
Well,
Um,
just as a little side note,
mhm.
I think that's so beautiful, and I'm resonating because I'm like, yeah, I was there too. And again, I hope I don't sound too negative here. I think there's forces working against us in society when we're trying to do stuff like that. And for one example, and this really upsets me, um, I don't take insurance. And there's some decisions that insurances here in Massachusetts, maybe elsewhere do. One of them is that they will reimburse you less for couples work. You get paid less for couples work than you do for
Makes no
individual
sense.
work.
I know.
And then for group work, it's even harder to get that up and going. And so, what you're talking about, from my understanding, therapeutically, especially for college age kids, is one of the best supports that you could possibly do for them to have their peers, in a group supporting them and because they listen to their peers, but there's no money in it. And so that becomes a gateway in a way that we have to plow through, and it's very hard. If I was going to do that, like there's definitely sacrifices that have to be made. So, I just kind of commenting on what you're saying, and I want to hear more, but it just feels like that seems so beautiful, and I could just imagine some of the external pressures that were raining down on you as you were trying to do that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think for and zooming out for other therapists, they want to do this transformational work, maybe doing EMDR, doing IFS work, doing group therapy where they're doing some process work and really having people get that group healing that I, as an individual therapist, cannot provide. I cannot provide a group of your peers to give you feedback and see you in a unique way. So I think again, I think being in these systems of insurance or whatever it is hard because I think when I talk to therapists, they saw themselves trying to find a way to work that worked for them, that they felt like maybe all parts can be utilized
Mm.
in their work more. But they struggled really to find that and to have the energy and to have that hopefulness come through in their work. And so I think I'm just curious. So I'm segueing just because I know we're closer to the end of our time now to think about therapist parts and maybe what parts from your book that is upcoming in November, right? Um, that you talked about and that you notice for therapists that might be helpful as they're navigating if they're going to stay in therapy, if they're not going to stay in therapy, just to
Yeah,
understand it.
I'm going to totally plagiarize now.
Plagiarize
So I
your own
have a
work.
book
Okay, it's
coming
not
up in
plagiarism.
November. This is the first podcast I'm dropping this on.
Okay, cool.
The latest was I heard it would be out November, early November, 2025, and it's called IFS-Informed EMDR. And I got together with a whole bunch of other trainers and just masters in EMDR and IFS, and I just feel very lucky to have been part of the journey and really wanting to get it out to people. So this chapter is Annabelle McGoldrick, and you could look her up online. It's her name is Annabel, and then Nick MC Goldrick, Goldrick. And she's just so wise, and she's out of Australia, and she travels to England. And her chapter is the role of therapist parts in helping or hindering clients' healing, contrasting EMDR psychotherapy with an IFS therapy perspective. And so in this chapter, she says a lot of just really brilliant things. I think she's a journalist. She used to be a journalist, writing this peace journal with her husband, and so what she came up with in her chapter, and then she talks about each one of them. She talks about worried parts that come up inside of the therapist, suicidal parts that come up, but suicidal parts I think are two things. One, we all have suicidal parts that just want to quit, whether they're loud, whether they're not, to help make things a little bit, less agonizing for us. But then also maybe worried parts that might come up around the suicidal parts of clients, and how that activates us. We have the doubting parts that doubt us, the insecure parts. Um, and again, we don't all have all of these, but just listen to them and see if any of them resonate with you. We have organized parts, fix it parts, dreading parts, bored parts, stuck parts, impatient parts, judging parts, turn away parts, angry and frustrated parts, perfectionist and getting it right parts, approval seeking parts, self disclosing parts, um, rescuing, caretaking, trauma parts, dissociative parts, self like parts. Those are parts that we think are, the self, but they're really just have more of an energy of wanting to do something or change something as opposed to self, which is just being. Burned out parts, tired parts. So those are some of the ones that or all of the ones that she mentions in her chapter, and each one has this beautiful paragraph of description. And yeah, if you want, I'm just interested right now. Do you want me to read a little bit of what she wrote about burned out, tired parts?
Yeah.
All right. See what your thoughts here. And again, this is from the chapter of Annabelle McGoldrick. And all the names have changed. These are all protecting clients throughout the book. James had recently returned from holiday, but he still found it hard to not be triggered by his clients' stories of pain, abuse, and neglect. He felt burned by their stories, like it was happening to him. His supervisor helped him make the distinction between compassion and empathy. Although the two terms are used interchangeably, empathy is not a quality of self for a reason. Empathy is more merging and feeling for the other person, empathetic distress, with distress emerging from the person providing the empathy. In contrast, compassion is feeling for and not feeling with the other. Compassion is more a sense of being a loving, caring witness. We can still feel for the other person and offer whatever help we can, but we are not adding our own distress and suffering to the situation. If the EMDR therapist is blended with their fix it, rescuing, or over empathizing parts, not only are they not resonating with the client, but they risk getting overwhelmed and suffering from empathy fatigue and burnout.
Mm. Yeah.
So that really seems to fit your podcast and parts and part about burnout.
Yeah, it's just interesting. I wrote my dissertation on compassion satisfaction like many, many moons ago. And so empathy is this conduit for compassion satisfaction as well as compassion fatigue. So it's it's a way we feel satisfaction from the work and how we feel drained. So it's interesting, on opposite spectrums, how it could potentially be implicated, and perhaps thinking of that connected compassion as a place where we can be versus taking that so much into our body, into our mind space. And that's why I love the beauty of EMDR. And when I learned the modality, I really truly felt like I could be the facilitator and the guide versus the therapist or the person that is, helping to create this change for the client. I truly saw therapy. My role in therapy is truly the facilitator of your own process.
That's exactly right. And that's why like Dick Schwartz, who created IFS, would say something like, when he's feeling he's doing therapy the right way, he gets more energized by being in session. It's like you become the vessel or the conduit, and you're not really trying as hard or taking on the client's burdens as like your own or having to fix or having to change. It's just like, no, this is what it is. And I have the total faith that just by really being here, sitting with you and empathizing or being compassionate, there's going to be some softening inside their system. And we're just going to notice that together.
Yeah,
And so it takes a lot of the pressure off.
totally. Yeah. I wish we had time for more. I might just have to have you back on.
I guess I just have to come back. I'd be happy to.
You just have to come back and talk more about, the book, especially as it's coming out, maybe, towards the fall or something about,
Yeah.
and I think you're talking about burnout and a
Yeah.
summit
I
coming
have the
up.
book
So
coming out and I have, probably going to be trying to plug it a lot. So maybe at that point we could talk about the burnout that I might be currently experiencing. Hopefully not. Hopefully that was my deal.
I think the through line, so going back to what you had said at the beginning of, is burnout something that we struggle with to a degree throughout our lives and our careers? And I think of it more as somewhat of that because I identify with that. I don't feel like I have fully recovered from my burnout. And is that something that we face doing this kind of work, that we have to toggle between that counterbalance and not balance, but the counterbalance of the work and what resources that we need for ourselves at different parts of our lives based on our home life, based on our work life, based on whatever events are happening in the world, like right now. Like, yeah. We need a lot more counterbalance in our work due to the distress that we are feeling in the world, especially in the US. I have, people who listen to this in multiple countries, as you know, as a podcaster, but especially in the US, I think we're seeing that. So
Oh yeah, and I think it definitely other places are feeling that too. It's happening in the U.S., but it's happening in so many places, and a lot of places are watching the U.S. Perhaps with horror, like we are. Um, yeah, that really resonates with me. That I think, again, kind of leave the audience that your burnout does not mean you're broken. It does not mean anything is wrong with you. In fact, it means that your body is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing, and it's giving you a message, and it's telling you that within this field, there is a lot that will burn us out. I mean, it's just if your eyes are open and you see the struggling, you see the suffering, how can you
yeah.
not be burned out to some degree? So it's this message of what do you need in that moment to really find that balance?
Yeah, love it. Well, where can people reach out if they would like to connect with you?
Yeah, well, I have my website, www.empoweredthroughcompassion.com. I have a podcast of the same name. So feel free to check me out and look me up. It was a
Awesome.
pleasure being here with you. It's so nice talking about this stuff. It's so relevant.
Yeah. Yes. Well, it's what I live and breathe in my burnout space. But yeah, I think right now, especially. So, well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And I know I'll connect with you soon.
Sounds great. My pleasure.